It's no secret, I love masking. I love using the masking tools in Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw because I would say the majority of work, or at least the majority of important work that I do to my photos is done inside of that masking panel there. And there's so many different little tips and tricks. So I thought we'd cover 7 tips. There's actually like little mini tips within a lot of the tips, so it's more, but 7 sounds like a really good number. 7 tips to use for your masking inside of Lightroom. Now, this will work inside of Lightroom Classic, which I'm demoing in, but will also work, most of them work the same inside of Lightroom, and they also work very similar inside of Adobe Camera Raw. Let's go ahead and get started. The first one is with color. So this one sneaks by a lot of people. I added a linear gradient to the bottom part of this photo. Before I added a color change to it, it just looked a little dark, a little dingy to me. I wanted to bring out some of those colors from the sun in it. So I added a linear gradient to it so it was nice and feathered toward the bottom. And I'm not always able to get the color I want through the temperature, tint, and even hue. You're restricted to a certain point to what you can do there. But a lot of people miss this little color setting that's at the bottom there. You can click on the color swatch and you can choose any color you want as well as the saturation. I find it a really good way when I just want to blast a certain color at something and I get a little bit frustrated trying to tweak these settings to get it exactly right. Now, to build off of that tip, if you ever make an adjustment to a setting like I do right here, if you simply don't like those adjustments anymore, all you got to do is double click the name of the adjustment and it'll reset that back to its default. Even the color, if I double click the color, it takes away that color and sets it back to a neutral color swatch. Next one here is a very big one, overlay. So sometimes the overlay can be helpful. Usually when you create a new mask, its default is going to be to show you the overlay, because you need to know what you just masked, and we haven't moved any settings over here on the right hand side yet. So I need to know at least where this mask is. As soon as I move a setting, that overlay goes away. Well, a useful thing is, let's go ahead and just get rid of that mask here. A useful thing is to know that I can also change that overlay color, or change the overlay. So number one, if I ever want to bring it back, I just press the letter O for overlay. That'll bring it back. And then I can press O again, and all it does is just toggle the overlay on and off. But the other thing that I can do, I can press O for overlay, and I can press Shift O, and I can cycle through different overlay colors. For some people, they don't like the red, so green is a little bit more in your face. White and black are, to me, not quite as useful, a little bit more subdued, so somewhere between that red and that green works pretty good. Following up on that one, you can see there's 3 little dots for a pop-out menu next to this. You can choose a color overlay, or you can choose a whole bunch of other ones down here. So maybe you want to see just how refined this mask is. So I'll click on something else, another mask that I created, and you can see just how refined that mask is by seeing it on white on black. So again, it just depends what you're looking for and what types of masks that you're creating inside of there. This next tip, this one sneaks by. A lot of people think of this one more not as a tip that I think you're going to use a lot. Think of it as a public service announcement. I get this question quite often where somebody says, I put a linear gradient onto the photo, but I don't know where it is. Like, where'd the handle go? How can I move it around? Somehow there's a little setting down here in the toolbar. And by the way, another tip is you can press T for toolbar to show and hide that. So you may have accidentally hidden it, or your cat walked across, whatever. But you can see show edit pins set to never. What you want generally for this is auto, which means when you move your cursor in, it shows the edit pins. When you move your cursor out, it hides them. So the keyboard shortcut for that is H for hide. Okay, so you can toggle between always, never, or switch that to auto. It's a good one too. I actually don't mind always myself, but again, everybody works a little bit differently. Next one up here, when we create a new mask, if we are creating anything with a brush or a linear or radial gradient, when you hold down the shift key, it constrains that mask to perfect angles. Okay, so I can make that perfectly straight across. If I were to create another new mask, let's go ahead and delete that one. If I were to create one with the radial gradient, shift will constrain that to a perfect circle. And if I were to create one with the brush, Shift will actually force me to brush in a perfect line, which can be useful at certain times if you're working near the horizon or something like that. Another one here, speaking of the brush tool. So let's say I am adding a mask with the brush and I'm brushing along somewhere. We have an old keyboard shortcut. I've created a mask up there, and if you wanted to subtract, you think you have to come over here and click on subtract. But there's an old keyboard shortcut floating around in there, which is the Option key on Mac or Alt key on PC. That changes the brush into minus or subtract mode, so I can go in there and subtract while I'm brushing. So I don't necessarily need to always go up here to these buttons to add and subtract. I can just keep clicking, hold down your Option or Alt key on the Mac and go into subtract mode, and that makes it a little bit easier to add and subtract, especially with the brush as you're brushing onto the photo there. Another one here is if we are using the brush, we'll go to another brush one. If we are using the brush and we want to, let's say, make the exposure darker, if we want the brush to be perfect, so right now you can see I'm brushing along here and it's bleeding over into another area. If I go in here and I create a brush mask, and I hold down the Command key on Mac or Control on PC, it restricts that to just an auto mask, which is actually enabling the auto mask feature and using that to not let it spill over. The way that it works is that little crosshair you see in the middle, you're going to want to make sure that doesn't spill over past your object. So if I start spilling over past, of course it's going to do that, but as long as you keep it inside of a contrasty area, auto mask can actually do a pretty good job of just working on a specific area. To build on top of that, I won't do a whole tutorial on it. Give the object mask a try too. So maybe you don't want to do auto mask all the time. Object mask is a great way and a very overlooked one if you need to select something very, very specific inside of there. All right, moving on down the line when it comes to presets with masks. Before we get to that, very quick word from our sponsor. I promise it'll only take 45 seconds, but I think it's an important message too, where what you're seeing here is tips. If you like the teaching style, I think tips are great, but I also think we need to see the big picture. We need to see all of this stuff put together into a workflow, because workflow has changed with what Lightroom can do and now what Photoshop can do. Workflow has changed. The place where we do things has changed. The amount that we're able to do is now easier than ever. So now sometimes we do things that we couldn't do before. I put together a course called From Simple to Stunning, which takes a bunch of your photos, my customers' photos, works through the entire workflow. What we do inside of Lightroom or the raw editor, and then what we would do inside of Photoshop. It's very, very visual. It's very easy to watch. Each video is nice and segmented, not too long. And it's also a very affordable course. These start to finish courses tend to be some of my most popular ones, and people seem to really like them. So I do hope you'll swing by to find a little bit more out about it. As I left you here, we were talking about masks and presets. One of the things that you can do is you can create a preset from what we've done here so far. So I can pop over here in my preset panel, I can create a preset, and I'll check none. But what I can do is turn on the masking settings, and it's going to mask, and it's going to remember that there's an AI sky selection in there. Okay. So once I create that mask, and I won't go through the process, just know it's saving an AI sky created mask. If you were to go apply this to another photo that doesn't have the sky in the exact same place, it'll recompute that sky for that specific photo. So that's a nice little feature if you're somebody that likes to make your own presets there. That's a really good way to make use of these sky and subject selections, because it works with all of your AI selections here. So between sky, background, people, it will work with all of those, and that makes it nice and easy. If you go to use that preset on another photo, it will recompute the AI detection that it used the first time. It's not going to use the same exact mask for the sky. It'll use the same settings that you select over here on the right-hand side, but it's not going to use the same mask. Speaking of all these settings over on the right-hand side, it can get pretty unwieldy. Public service announcement. If you see the word basic and below, and you wonder why, I created a new mask like this one here, and then I go and I adjust the photo and adjust the entire photo. If you're working below the line, the word basic here, you're working globally on all your settings. It can get a little confusing. You've got to work above the basic line, which are the masking settings. But back to my tip, you've got all these different panels which can get pretty unwieldy inside of there, like our panels inside of Lightroom have. If you right click in an empty gray area there, we do have solo mode. So solo mode will let you only open one panel at a time, and it'll automatically close the panel that you had previously in there. So it makes it nice and easy, keeps you from getting into that panel mayhem of having all those panels open and having to scroll up and down. Next one is before and afters here. So in the before and afters, we've got a couple of things that you're going to want to see here. Number one, down at the bottom of the masks panel, there's a little eyeball, which shows you an entire before and after of all your masks, which can be really useful to see. That same eyeball exists up in the masking panel up here at the top. So that's pretty useful if you just want to see the results of all your masks, all of them turned on and off. Of course, each mask has a specific eyeball icon, but more than that, another useful thing is when you click on a specific mask to target it, when you look over here on the right hand side, you can see the settings that you've used because the eyeball is turned on. It's not grayed out like these other eyeballs inside of there. So you can turn on each specific panel, but more than that, it actually shows you that, okay, there are settings applied to this mask inside of this specific panel. And our last one's going to be duplicating. Every mask has a little sub mask inside of it. There's the main mask layer, and then there's a little sub mask inside of it, which when you add and subtract and intersect these little mini masks in there, that it'll almost grow as layers inside of there. Well, we can duplicate a mask, but it's important to know which ways to do it. So let's go to my linear gradient one here. If I go to the linear gradient, and I click the pop-out menu and I choose duplicate, it puts it into the same mask group. So now, when I move the adjustments for that, I'm moving the adjustments for all linear gradients in this mask group. You may want that, but you also may not. So if you don't want that, and you want to have a totally separate mask, but you want a duplicate of it, you can click the pop-out menu for the main mask layer, then come down here and hit duplicate. Now you've got an entirely different mask. Now I can move this mask around. I can change this mask settings independent of the other mask layer that we had inside there. So there you can duplicate a mask. It's just important because I see a lot of people get caught up in duplicating the little mask layer that's inside of there or duplicating the entire mask. Speaking of masking, so if you're watching this video, chances are you like masks. I also did another video a while ago, it's totally free to watch, that shows a little tip on working with halos and sometimes getting some of those edges that we see around the masks and how that you can get rid of them. That'd be a great place to go to next.